The Wyoming wind cut through Nora Thompson's wool coat like 1,000 frozen knives, and she knew with absolute certainty that she was going to die out here in this white hell. The wagon lurched violently to the left, throwing her against the wooden seat hard enough to bruise her ribs. And then came the crack that sounded like a gunshot echoing across the endless prairie. Her heart dropped into her stomach as the entire left side of the wagon tilted downward at a sickening angle, the wheel having given up its fight against the frozen ruts and unforgiving terrain. It was December of 1877, and Nora had been traveling alone from Cheyenne to her uncle's ranch near the Montana border when the blizzard struck with the fury of divine retribution. She had thought she could outrun it, had pushed her 2 horses harder than she should have, and now she was paying the price for her stubborn pride. The snow fell so thick she could barely see 3 feet ahead, and the temperature had dropped so low that her breath froze in the air before her face. She was 22 years old, unmarried, and about to become another cautionary tale whispered around winter fires. Nora climbed down from the broken wagon, her boots sinking into snow that reached past her knees. The wind screamed around her, pulling at her long dark hair that had come loose from its pins hours ago. She struggled to the damaged wheel and felt her chest tighten with despair. The wooden hub had cracked completely through, and several spokes had splintered beyond any repair she could manage. Even if she had the tools and the knowledge, her fingers were already going numb inside her gloves. The horses whinnied nervously, their heads down against the driving snow. She knew they could not pull the wagon in this condition, and she could not leave her supplies behind. Everything she owned in this world was in that wagon, including the inheritance money sewn into the lining of her trunk, her mother's jewelry, and the deed to the land her uncle had promised her. Without those things, she had nothing. Nora tried to think clearly despite the cold that was seeping into her bones. She could unhitch 1 horse and try to ride for help, but she had no idea where she was or how far to the nearest settlement. She could freeze to death on horseback just as easily as standing here. She could try to make shelter with the wagon, but the wheel made it unstable, and she did not know how to build a proper fire in these conditions without proper kindling. A sob caught in her throat, but she swallowed it down. Her father had always said that Thompson women did not cry, they survived. But her father was dead 3 years now, killed in a mining accident, and her mother had followed him 6 months later from grief and pneumonia. Nora had no siblings, no close family except the uncle she had never met, and right now survival seemed like a cruel joke. She was trying to unhitch the horses with fingers that barely worked when she heard it. At first, she thought the wind was playing tricks on her, but then it came again. A whistle, low and clear, cutting through the storm. Nora's head snapped up, her eyes straining against the white curtain of snow. A dark shape materialized from the blizzard, growing larger and more solid with each second. A horse and rider, moving with careful purpose through the drifts. Nora's hand instinctively went to the small pistol she kept in her coat pocket, but she did not draw it. If this person meant her harm, she was dead anyway. If they meant to help, the gun would only complicate matters. The rider pulled up alongside her wagon, and Nora found herself looking up at a man who seemed carved from the same rough country that surrounded them. He was tall, she could tell even mounted, with broad shoulders wrapped in a heavy sheepskin coat. A wide-brimmed hat was pulled low over his face, and a bandana covered his nose and mouth against the cold. But his eyes were visible, and they were the clearest blue she had ever seen, like summer sky trapped in winter. "You are in a bad way," he said, his voice muffled by the bandana but still carrying authority. It was not a question. "The wheel broke," Nora said, hating how small her voice sounded. "I cannot fix it." The man swung down from his horse with easy grace despite the conditions. He was even taller than she had thought, well over 6 feet, and moved like someone comfortable in his own skin. He walked around the wagon, examining the damage, while Nora stood there shivering and feeling useless. "You are heading north," he asked, not looking at her, "to my uncle's ranch, near the Montana line. You will not make it tonight. This storm is going to get worse before it gets better." He crouched down beside the broken wheel, running his gloved hands over the damage. "I can fix this enough to get you to shelter, but not here. We need to get out of this wind." "Who are you?" Nora asked, though she knew it was probably rude. But her mother had also taught her not to trust strange men, even when they appeared to be offering help. He stood and pulled the bandana down, revealing a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of dark stubble. His face was weathered but handsome, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he was not smiling now. "Carson Vance. I have a line shack about 2 miles east. It is not much, but it has 4 walls and a stove. I cannot leave my wagon. Everything I own is in it." "Then you will freeze to death with your possessions, and that seems like a poor trade." His tone was not unkind, but it was firm. "I can get this wheel stable enough to roll if you are willing to risk it. Otherwise, you ride with me and we come back when the storm clears." Nora looked at the wagon, then at Carson Vance, then at the endless white nothing surrounding them. She had no good options, only less terrible ones. "Can you truly fix it?" "I have been fixing broken things my entire life," he said. "A wagon wheel is nothing special." She made her decision. "Then please try." Carson nodded and moved to his horse, a big bay gelding that stood patiently despite the weather. From his saddlebags, he produced tools that Nora would not have thought to carry. A small saw, rope, a hammer, and several pieces of wood that looked like they had been cut for this exact purpose. He must travel prepared for every disaster, she thought. He worked quickly and efficiently, his movements practiced and sure. He cut away the most damaged spokes, used the rope to bind the hub together, and wedged the spare wood pieces into place to reinforce the structure. It was not pretty, but after 20 minutes of work, the wheel looked like it might hold. "This will not last more than a few miles, and it will not take much weight," Carson said, straightening up. "You need to take only what you absolutely cannot replace and leave the rest. We will come back for it." Nora wanted to argue, but she could no longer feel her feet and her teeth were chattering so hard she was afraid of biting her tongue. She climbed into the wagon and quickly sorted through her things. The trunk with the money and documents, one change of clothes, her mother's jewelry box, a few personal items, and some food supplies. She stuffed everything into 2 bags and a small trunk that Carson lifted as if it weighed nothing. He secured her belongings to his horse and then helped her back onto the wagon seat. His hands were strong and steady, and even through their gloves she could feel the warmth of him. "Drive slow and follow directly behind me," he instructed. "Do not try to go around drifts, go through them. The wheel will hold if you do not ask too much of it, and if it does not hold, then you ride with me and your horses follow." He pulled the bandana back up over his face. "But it will hold. I do not do poor work." They moved out into the blizzard, Carson on his bay leading the way, Nora on the wagon following in his tracks. It was the longest 2 miles of her life. Every bump and jolt sent her heart into her throat, certain that the wheel would collapse again and leave her stranded. But Carson had been true to his word. The repair held. The line shack appeared out of the snow like a miracle, a small wooden structure built into the lee of a rocky outcrop that provided some protection from the wind. It was barely more than a single room, but it had a door and walls and a chimney. and Nora could have wept with relief. Carson helped her down from the wagon and quickly unhitched her horses, leading all three animals to a lean-to shelter attached to the shack. Nora grabbed her bags and stumbled through the door, her legs barely working after hours of cold and tension. Inside was dark and not much warmer than outside, but at least the wind could not reach her. Carson followed moments later, carrying her small trunk and an armload of supplies. He moved around the small space with familiar efficiency, lighting a lantern, building a fire in the potbelly stove, checking that the chimney drew properly. Nora stood by the door, dripping melting snow onto the plank floor and trying not to let him see how badly she was shaking. Now that they were out of immediate danger, reaction was setting in. She could have died out there, would have died if Carson Vance had not appeared like some guardian angel riding out of the storm. "Sit," Carson said, pointing to one of two chairs near the stove. "Get out of those wet clothes before you catch pneumonia." Nora's cheeks flushed hot despite the cold. "I cannot possibly undress with you here." He gave her a look that was equal parts exasperation and amusement. "Lady, I just saved your life. I am not interested in compromising your virtue. But if you want to keep your modesty and lose your toes to frostbite, that is your choice." He turned his back to her and began stripping off his own wet outer layers. "There are blankets in that chest. Wrap up in those while your things dry." Nora's practical side warred with her sense of propriety, and practical won. She turned her back to him and quickly shed her wet coat, dress, and petticoats, hanging them on pegs near the stove. She wrapped herself in two thick wool blankets that smelled of horse and wood smoke and man, and only then did she sit in the chair. Carson had removed his coat and vest, and was now working in his shirt sleeves, stirring something in a pot on the stove. Coffee, Nora realized as the rich smell filled the small space. He poured 2 tin cups and handed her one. "Drink," he said. "It will help." The coffee was strong enough to strip paint and slightly bitter, but it was hot and it was exactly what she needed. Nora wrapped both hands around the cup and let the warmth seep into her frozen fingers. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for helping me. I know I would have died out there." Carson settled into the other chair, his long legs stretched toward the stove. "You would have. That was foolish, traveling alone in winter. I had no choice. My uncle is expecting me, and I could not afford to wait until spring. The boarding house in Cheyenne was taking all my money. Your uncle would rather you arrived alive and late than frozen and on time." But his tone had softened slightly. "Where are you from originally?" "Pennsylvania." "Philadelphia." "My father moved us to Cheyenne when I was 16, chasing gold that never materialized. After my parents passed, my uncle wrote and offered me a home. He has a ranch and no children of his own. He said he could use the help and I could use the family." Nora took another sip of coffee. "What about you? Do you work for one of the ranches?" "I work for the Rocking W about 10 miles south of here. Been there 5 years now. I am the foreman." "And you just happened to be riding through a blizzard." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I was checking the line shacks, making sure they were stocked for winter. The storm came up faster than expected. I was heading back when I saw your wagon. Lucky for me. Lucky for both of us. I am not fond of finding frozen corpses on my range." They fell into silence, listening to the wind howl outside and the crackle of the fire. Nora studied Carson when she thought he was not looking. He was probably close to 30, she guessed, with the kind of rough handsomeness that came from hard work and harder living. His hands were scarred and calloused, his face weathered by sun and wind. But there was intelligence in those blue eyes and a quiet competence in everything he did. "You should rest," Carson said eventually. "The storm will blow itself out by morning, but we are not going anywhere tonight. Where will you sleep?" The shack had only one narrow cot against the far wall. I have my bedroll. I will be fine by the fire. He stood and began laying out his blankets. Take the cot. You have had a harder day than me. Nora wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a physical weight. She moved to the cot, still wrapped in her blankets, and lay down. The mattress was thin and lumpy, but it was off the floor and near the stove. She watched Carson settle by the fire, his back against the wall, his rifle within easy reach. "Mr. Vance," she said quietly, "Carson. If we are spending the night together, even chaperoned by a blizzard, you can call me Carson. Carson, why did you have spare wood cut to the right size for wagon wheels?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because this is not the first time I have found someone broken down in bad weather. Out here, you learn to be prepared for anything. Now sleep, Nora Thompson. Tomorrow will come soon enough." She wanted to ask how he knew her full name, then realized she must have said it at some point, or maybe he had seen it on her trunk. It did not matter. She closed her eyes and listened to the storm rage outside their fragile shelter, and for the first time in hours, she felt safe. Nora woke to pale light filtering through the small window and the smell of frying bacon. For a disoriented moment, she could not remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The blizzard, the broken wheel, Carson Vance appearing like some frontier savior. She sat up, clutching the blankets around her, and saw him at the stove. "Good morning," he said without turning around. "Your clothes should be dry. I reheated some biscuits and there is bacon. Not fancy, but it will keep you going." Nora's stomach growled in response. She had not eaten since yesterday morning, she realized. "Thank you. I will just—" He turned his back while she quickly dressed, grateful that her things had indeed dried overnight. The dress was wrinkled and probably needed washing, but it was better than blankets. She joined him at the small table where he had set out 2 plates of food. The meal was simple but good, and they ate in companionable silence. Through the window, Nora could see that the storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed into white perfection. The sky was that brilliant blue that only came after winter storms, and the sun glittered on the snow with almost painful brightness. "We should leave soon," Carson said, following her gaze. "The weather is clear now, but another storm could roll in. They travel in packs this time of year. Will the wheel hold for a while? But you need a proper repair, and you need it soon. The nearest town is Rawlins, about 15 miles south. They have a blacksmith who can fix you up properly. But my uncle's ranch is north, and you will not reach it on that wheel. Trust me on this." Carson stood and began packing up the dishes. "I will ride with you to Rawlins. Make sure you get there safely. Then you can send word to your uncle and wait for him to come get you, or get the wheel fixed and continue on your way with supplies and better weather." Nora knew he was right, even though the delay chafed at her. She had been so focused on reaching her destination that she had not considered the practicalities. "I cannot ask you to go that far out of your way. You are not asking. I am offering. Besides, I need to report into the ranch, and Rawlins is closer than riding all the way back." He pulled on his coat. "We leave in 10 minutes. Gather your things." The ride to Rawlins took most of the day. Carson kept the pace slow and steady, mindful of the damaged wheel and true to his word. He rode beside her the entire way. Not leading, not following, but beside her. It was a small thing, but it made Nora feel less alone than she had in months. They talked as they rode, their voices carrying in the clear, cold air. Carson told her about the rocking W Ranch, about the cattle and horses they raised, about the harsh winters and brutal summers. Nora told him about Philadelphia, about her father's dreams that had brought them west, about her mother's quiet strength and slow fading after her husband's death. "You miss it?" Carson asked. "The city?" Sometimes. I miss theaters and libraries and streets that do not turn to mud when it rains, but I do not miss the crowds or the noise or the feeling of being trapped. Nora adjusted the reins as the wagon hit a rough patch. Out here, even when things are difficult, at least you can breathe. That is why I came west, Carson said. I grew up in Missouri, on a farm that was too small and too poor to support all of us. I left when I was 17, worked my way through Kansas and Colorado, learning cattle and horses and how to survive. Found my way to Wyoming 5 years ago and decided to stay. The work is hard, but it is honest, and a man can make something of himself if he is willing to put in the effort. You have family back in Missouri? A shadow crossed his face. My parents died of cholera when I was 19. I have 2 younger sisters, both married now with families of their own. We write sometimes, but we are not close. They stayed in Missouri and I kept moving west. We are different people living different lives. There was a loneliness in his voice that Nora recognized because she felt it too. They were both adrift in their own ways, both looking for a place to belong. Maybe that was why they talked so easily, why the miles passed without awkwardness or uncomfortable silences. Rollins appeared in the late afternoon, a collection of wooden buildings clustered along the railroad tracks. It was not a large town, but it was bustling with activity. Cowboys, miners, railroad workers, and settlers all mixed together in a chaotic frontier stew. Nora felt suddenly self-conscious, aware of her travel-worn dress and wind-tangled hair. Carson led her directly to the blacksmith, an enormous man named Gus who looked like he had been carved from granite. He examined the wheel while Carson explained what had happened. "I can fix it," Gus said, his voice surprisingly gentle for such a large man. "But it will take a day, maybe 2. I need to forge new spokes and fit them properly. You cannot rush good work." "Can you recommend a place for the lady to stay?" Carson asked. "The Rocky Mountain Hotel is decent. Clean sheets, good food, and Mrs. Baker does not tolerate any nonsense in her establishment." Carson helped Nora arrange for her room and saw that her belongings were safely delivered. Then he walked her to the hotel, his hand light but steady on her elbow as they navigated the crowded boardwalk. "You will be safe here," he said as they stood in the hotel lobby. "Mrs. Baker runs a tight ship. Send word to your uncle and wait for his reply before you make any decisions." Nora felt an unexpected pang at the thought of him leaving. In the space of 1 day and 1 night, Carson Vance had become her lifeline, her connection to this strange new world. "Will I see you again?" Something flickered in those blue eyes. "I need to report to the ranch and collect my wages. I will be back in town tomorrow to check on your wheel. If you need anything before then, you send word to the Rocking W and they will find me. I do not know how to repay you for what you have done. You do not need to repay kindness. You just pass it on when you get the chance." He tipped his hat to her. "Until tomorrow, Nora." She watched him walk away, tall and confident in his worn boots and sheepskin coat, and felt something shift inside her chest. It was not gratitude, though she was grateful. It was not relief, though she was relieved. It was something else. Something newer and more dangerous. That evening, Nora composed a careful letter to her uncle, explaining her delay and asking for his advice. She posted it with the clerk at the hotel, who assured her that the mail rider would carry it north within 2 days. Then she retreated to her small but clean room and tried not to think about blue eyes and strong hands and a quiet voice saying her name. Carson returned the next afternoon as promised. He found Nora in the hotel dining room, picking at a plate of roast beef and potatoes. His hair was damp and he had shaved, revealing the strong lines of his jaw. He looked younger without the stubble and impossibly handsome in a clean shirt and vest. "The wheel will be ready tomorrow," he he said, sliding into the chair across from her without invitation. Gus does good work. It will be stronger than the original. That is good news. Nora pushed her plate away. I sent the letter to my uncle. The clerk said it should reach him within the week. And then I wait for his reply, I suppose, see what he wants me to do. She studied Carson's face, trying to read his expression. What about you? Should you not be heading back to the ranch? The boss gave me 3 days off. Said I have been working too hard and needed to rest. A smile tugged at his mouth. So I thought I would rest in Rawlins. Make sure you are taken care of. Nora's heart did something complicated in her chest. You do not need to do that, I know, but I am going to anyway. He leaned back in his chair, his long legs stretched under the table. Besides, I have been curious about something. What? You. You come from a city, from a comfortable life with culture and refinement. Why would you really want to come out here to the middle of nowhere? There must be more to the story than just a generous uncle. Nora was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. In Philadelphia, I was expected to marry well, to make a good match that would improve my family's standing. But after my father died, we had no standing to improve. We were just poor, and I was just a girl with no prospects and no future. My mother's friends tried to be kind, but I could see the pity in their eyes. After she died, they stopped coming around altogether. So you ran away. I prefer to think I ran towards something, toward the chance to make my own life on my own terms. She met his eyes directly. Is that so wrong? Not wrong at all, just brave. Carson signaled the waitress for coffee. Most people never have the courage to start over. They spent the afternoon walking through Rawlins, and Carson showed her the town as if it were something precious. The general store with its impossible variety of goods, the telegraph office that connected this small town to the larger world, the church that served 5 different denominations. He introduced her to people as they passed, a nod here and a greeting there. And Nora realized that Carson Vance was well respected in this place. In the evening, they had dinner together at a small restaurant that served surprisingly good steak. They talked about everything and nothing, their conversation ranging from books to horses to the best way to make coffee over a campfire. Nora found herself laughing more than she had in months, found herself relaxing in a way she had not since her mother's death. When Carson walked her back to the hotel, the moon was rising over the snow-covered landscape, turning everything silver and magical. "Thank you for today," Nora said as they stood on the hotel steps. "You did not have to spend your time off with me. Where else would I want to be?" Carson's voice was soft in the darkness. "Nora, I need to tell you something." Her heart began to beat faster. "What?" "When I found you in that storm, I thought I was just helping someone in trouble. That is what you do out here. You help because you might need help yourself someday. But then I started talking to you, and I realized you are not like anyone I have ever met. You are smart and brave, and you do not complain about things you cannot change. You just deal with them and move forward. Carson, I know this is fast, and I know you have plans and a whole life ahead of you, but I would like to keep seeing you if you are agreeable. I would like to court you properly, the way a lady like you deserves to be courted." Nora felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were good tears. "I would like that very much." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his whole face. "Good. Then tomorrow, after we collect your wheel, I will take you to meet the boss. The rocking W always needs help, especially in the main house. Maybe your uncle could use a little more time to prepare for your arrival, and you could use a little more time to decide if that is really where you want to be. Are you offering me a job? I am offering you options. The rest is up to you." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of new experiences and deepening feelings. Nora took the job at the Rocking W, working in the main house for the ranch owner and his wife. They were good people, stern but fair, and they treated her with respect. She helped with cooking and cleaning, mending and organizing, and in return she had a clean room, good food and wages that she carefully saved. But the best part of the job was Carson. He was there every day, either at the main house for meals or out on the range where Nora could see him from the windows. He courted her with a quiet intensity that both thrilled and terrified her. He brought her wildflowers that somehow survived in the snow. He taught her to ride better than her tentative city skills allowed. He took her to dances in town and introduced her to every person he knew, and they talked. They talked about their dreams and fears, their pasts and their hopes for the future. Carson told her about the small ranch he wanted to buy someday, about building something that was his own. Nora told him about wanting to belong somewhere, to put down roots and build a life that mattered. "What did your uncle say?" Carson asked one evening as they sat on the porch of the main house, watching the sun set in a riot of orange and gold. He wrote back, "He is very understanding about the delay. He said I should take my time and come when I am ready." Nora pulled her shawl tighter against the evening chill. "He also said that if I found a reason to stay in Wyoming, he would understand that too. Apparently, he met his wife under similar circumstances and always believed in fate." "You believe in fate?" "I believe I was meant to be in that blizzard so you could find me. I believe some meetings are too perfect to be coincidence." She turned to look at him. "Do you believe in fate?" "I believe in this," Carson said, and he kissed her. It was not Nora's first kiss, but it felt like the first one that mattered. His lips were warm and gentle, asking rather than taking, and she answered by leaning into him. The kiss deepened, grew more urgent, and Nora felt heat bloom through her entire body despite the winter cold. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Carson rested his forehead against hers. "I am in love with you, Nora Thompson. I have been since the moment you agreed to trust me in that storm. I know it is fast, and I know we have not known each other long, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life." "I love you too," Nora whispered. "I did not know I could feel this way about anyone. Marry me." It was not really a question. "I do not have much right now, but I am a hard worker and I will spend every day of my life making sure you never regret saying yes. We can build something together, Nora. A home, a family, a life." "What do you say?" What could she say? This man had saved her life, had given her hope when she had none, had shown her a future brighter than anything she had imagined. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Rawlins, with the ranch hands and townspeople as witnesses. Nora wore a simple blue dress that the rancher's wife helped her make, and Carson wore his best suit and looked so handsome that Nora could barely breathe. The preacher pronounced them man and wife, and when Carson kissed her, the whole church erupted in cheers. They spent their wedding night in the line shack where Carson had first brought her, the place where their story had truly begun. He built up the fire while Nora stood by the window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape that no longer seemed threatening but beautiful. "Having second thoughts?" Carson asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "Never. I was just thinking how strange life is. 2 months ago I was alone and frightened and certain I was going to die. Now I am here with you and I have never felt more alive." He turned her in his arms, his blue eyes serious in the firelight. "I will spend the rest of my life making you happy, Nora Vance. Just love me," she said. "That is all I need." Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a discovery of each other that left them both breathless and changed. Carson was gentle with her inexperience, patient and careful, and when they finally came together, Nora understood for the first time what it meant to be truly connected to another person. Afterward, They lay tangled together in the narrow cot, listening to the wind outside and the crackle of the fire. Nora traced patterns on Carson's chest, marveling at the reality of him, the solid warmth of her husband. "Tell me about the ranch you want to buy," she said softly. Carson's hand stroked through her long dark hair. "There is a place about 20 miles north of here. Good water, sheltered valley, enough grazing for a decent herd. The owner is getting old and wants to sell. I have been saving for 3 years and I am almost there. How much more do you need?" "About $200. Nora was quiet for a moment. "I have $300 in my trunk, my inheritance from my parents. I want you to have it." Carson went still. "Nora, I cannot take your money. It is not my money anymore. It is our money, and I want to use it to buy our future." She propped herself up on her elbow to look at him. "Please, Carson, let me do this. Let me contribute to our dream." He studied her face in the firelight, and she saw the moment he accepted. "Together, then, we build this together. Always together." Spring came to Wyoming with a rush of green and wildflowers. Carson bought the ranch with their combined savings, and they spent the first months working from dawn to dusk to make it theirs. They repaired fences, patched the roof of the small ranch house, built a new barn. Carson bought a small herd of cattle and some good horses. Nora planted a garden and learned to cook on a wood stove, and discovered she had a talent for keeping books and managing finances. It was hard work, harder than anything Nora had ever done in Philadelphia. Her hands grew calloused, her skin tanned, her body grew strong from physical labor. But she had never been happier. She woke every morning to Carson's kiss, spent her days building something real and lasting, and fell asleep every night in her husband's arms. Their first visitor was Nora's uncle, who rode down from Montana in early summer. He was a gruff man in his 60s with kind eyes and a booming laugh. He approved of Carson immediately, and over dinner he told stories about Nora's father as a young man that made her laugh and cry at the same time. "Your father would be proud of you," he said as he was leaving. "You found yourself a good man and you are making something real. That is all he ever wanted for you." Other visitors followed. Carson's sisters wrote and eventually came for a visit with their families. The neighboring ranchers stopped by to welcome the new owners. The preacher from Rawlins came to bless the house. Slowly, steadily, Nora and Carson built not just a ranch but a community, a network of friends and neighbors who looked out for each other. The seasons turned. Their first winter as ranch owners was brutal, with storms that buried the valley in snow and temperatures that plunged below zero. But they had prepared well, and they weathered it together, spending long evenings by the fire reading aloud to each other or just talking about their plans for spring. In March of 1879, Nora realized she was pregnant. She told Carson on the morning of their first anniversary, handing him a tiny pair of knitted booties that she had made in secret. He stared at them for a long moment, then looked up at her with wonder in his eyes. "We are going to have a baby." In October, the doctor thinks. Carson let out a whoop of joy and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. "We are going to have a baby. Nora, we are going to be parents. Are you happy?" "Happy. I am the luckiest man alive." He set her down carefully, his hands already protective on her still flat belly. "Are you happy?" "So happy I can barely stand it." Their son was born on a cold October morning, with the doctor from Rawlins in attendance and Carson pacing holes in the floor downstairs. The labor was long and hard, but when Nora finally heard her baby's first cry, every moment of pain was forgotten. "You have a son," the doctor announced, carrying the squalling infant to meet his father. Carson took his son with shaking hands, his face transformed by awe and love. "He is perfect." "Nora, he is absolutely perfect." They named him James after Nora's father, with the middle name of Thomas after Carson's father. James Vance came into the world healthy and loud, with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. He was the center of their universe from the moment he drew breath. The years rolled by, each one bringing new joys and challenges. The ranch prospered under Carson's careful management and Nora's sharp business sense. They added to their land, increased their herd, built a bigger house with 4 bedrooms and a real parlor. James grew into a sturdy boy who loved horses and followed his father everywhere. 2 years after James came Sarah, with her father's smile and her mother's practical nature. 3 years after Sarah came Daniel, as wild and free as the Wyoming wind. And 4 years after Daniel came little Emma, the baby of the family, who wrapped everyone around her tiny finger from the day she was born. The ranch house that had once seemed too big was now bursting with life and love. There were always boots in the hallway, toys scattered across the floor,